For many years, the Western narrative about Africa has been shaped by historical controversies and a perception that has put Africa as a needy continent, a continent that has only poor people and people who are dying of hunger. And this is something that most white people and even blacks have embraced because some of them have not visited the African continent, and therefore they may not have any clear idea of how this continent looks like. Others have also decided to use that perception as something to really propagate their desire to continue making Africa look like a place where nothing good can happen in. Now, I came across this video where a white person was kind of questioning why Africans would want to really leave the African continent and go to Europe, yet for him, he thinks Africa has better climatic and environmental circumstances that should make somebody really thrive in the continent. So he was wondering, why would a black person desire to come out of Africa and go live in Europe where there are continuous adverse weather conditions that may affect their lifestyle? So he made this video, and then there is a black guy who really gave a better response that I really want us to talk about and analyze. Let's watch this video, then come back and talk more about it.
Have you ever been to one of these? Almost half of Europeans live in a place like this or something like it. Europe was built to fight the cold, because in the colder climate in the wintertime, we can't live outside, we'd freeze to death. And so we built these big apartment complexes that were very efficient. Efficient because they have in the basement usually a heating system called central heating. And from that central place, they heat the whole building and everybody stays warm. This is the only way to do it in Europe, because it's so cold and heating is so expensive, we have to cut the cost and huddle people together in these kinds of apartment blocks. So that's why I wonder, if you're an African from a place like this, why would you want to come to a place like this? I don't get it. Do you even understand that most Europeans living in these apartment complexes dream every night of making enough money so they can move to Africa and live there? Why at this point would any migrant even still want to come to a place like Paris or London or Rotterdam? These places are horrible. Even if the city center looks kind of nice, the outer rings of these cities where you actually have to live look like this or this. They are absolute shit places. In Europe, you have to be rich to have it well, but most people aren't rich. Like I said, Europe was built to withstand the cold. It was not made for living comfortably.
Looking at this from a Eurocentric perspective, I think it would be fair for anyone to agree with you on this, Johannes. It would be the most honorable thing to do to agree with you on this. I mean, why would someone living in this, as you claimed, really want to move to a place where people live in this? Honestly, I think it's really unfathomable, or should I say enigmatic, so to speak. However, if any of you watching this video have ever watched any of the Scooby-Doo cartoon series, you would understand that the lesson Scooby-Doo always tries to teach us is that the real monsters are always humans. It doesn't matter how long it takes them to unravel the mystery. They always find out that real monsters are humans. So what if we flipped the switch and asked the same question from an African perspective? If we took a sincere look at the root cause of why Africans move from here to here, we might be able to demystify this inscrutable idea of why people would really move from a place like this to a place like this. Maybe I have to joggle your memories a bit. Something could ring a bell. Now, approximately 600 years ago, some European marauders, I mean your forefathers, arrived on the shores of what is now known as West and Central Africa to forage for food. They left their heavenly places in Europe, you know, they left their advanced, civilized Disney World castles, you know, like they left this to places like this in Africa. You know, to be honest, some of us Africans are still trying to fathom the reason why your forefathers built ships and started sailing all the way to Africa that actually had nothing but poor, primitive, uncivilized, barbarous, and benighted people. We are still trying to figure it out. Why? None of you has been honest enough to tell us why those ships left the shores of Africa with items your leaders, your forefathers needed to keep all of you alive. None of you have been able to tell us. We are still trying to figure it out why these visitations never ended. Why they didn't end? They came once, they didn't end. We can't juxtapose the fact that your forefathers sat in Berlin between November 1884 and February 1885 at the Berlin Conference without the presence of a single African. Not a single African leader was present. Your forefathers sat there to split the continent of Africa like a pizza. And the fact that you all came to save us, just like this snake is saving this fish from drowning. We can't juxtapose how your forefathers actually came to save us from dying from hunger and then leaving our shores with food items for you. You continued to stay for hundreds of years until it was our human capital you started extracting. Now, we may not be able to understand why your forefathers, I mean those marooners who came here to rob, to plunder, couldn't stay in Europe and enjoy all these good things, right? All these riches and all this technology you guys had that nature blessed you with. But I can help you to understand why some Africans, I can help you to understand the reason why some Africans are leaving this to this. It is simply because your Ajibole forefathers and their great-grandchildren till now have turned Africa from this to this. Simply put, it can be explained as the circumstance dictates the actions. That is why. I can also help you to understand that if not for Africa, you, Johannes, and the likes of you would have been extinct by now. If not for Africa, you would have all been extinct by now.
Now, having listened to both the two videos that I've just played to you, I tend to think that possibly the black guy got the white guy wrong. And another thing here could be that because of the bitterness and because of historical challenges that Africa has gone through, the black guy there was kind of desiring to really put his point across to ensure that this white man gets schooled on what Africa is and how Africans have lived over the years to really shape their current circumstances. So his approach to this for me was a little bit wrong, but I also tend to agree with him on many grounds, because what the white person in the video was kind of trying to portray there is a situation whereby he thinks that Africans have an ideal life in Africa and that they should not be desiring to get out of Africa and go to Europe. But this is something that most white people tend to really not capture in their imaginations, because Africa has had a lot of good things going on, but there are also bad things happening. And much of the things that are bad happening in the continent are always because of the external influence. And the external influence here comes from what you find countries like United States, countries like France, countries like Germany, and many other Western nations trying to do in Africa. They have captured a lot of mines in Africa, and they are taking away our precious gold. They are coming here, destroying our cultures and destroying our languages, and then giving us their cultures and their languages to really speak in them. So this is something that they have used, the Western nations have used in Africa to ensure that they continue manipulating us and they can have a better grasp of what is going on in the continent. So I also will side with the black guy here for once, because he has kind of outlined some of the bad things that the whites have done in Africa to make many Africans desire to get out of the continent. I was reading a research paper that was done by one Moriah Schnoz, and this is a tourist who came to Kenya in Africa and had some experience and tried to really check whether the perception that has been sent to them by Western media is the real truth that really exists in Africa. And I like some points that this scholar was making in his research paper. And this is what he was saying, that before visiting Kenya, I wondered why Africa seemed so vulnerable to war, corruption, poverty, and disease. My own worldview was greatly shaped by the media coverage surrounding Africa, which tends to be very unbalanced. He goes on to say that typically it covers only the extremes and tragic cases and fails to represent positive events in Africa. In turn, this view has been used to justify oppressive foreign policy. Moreover, I have come to the conclusion that the majority of tragedies in Africa are a direct result of foreign influence, particularly by the United States and Europe. How the West views Africa has been socially constructed over centuries of controversial history. Perceptions of Africa from European and American governments have been used to justify exploitative political and economic agendas. Throughout Africa's existence, the West has ignored Africa's political, technological, and economic advances in order to perpetuate the image of Africa being inferior to the West. Understanding Africa's complex history is therefore essential in order to avoid further misunderstandings. I tend to agree with the scholar here because he has kind of portrayed everything that has been happening. Africa has been painted negatively by most of the Western media, and this is a strategy that has been used to ensure that we do not really have our heads held high. We must always think bad about ourselves. We must think that we are not good enough, and that is why they can gather the courage to come to our continent, tell us that they want to give us what we call democracy, decide who we want to elect, decide the lifestyle that we must live. And this is something that most people have really adopted in themselves because we were born, we found this as the norm of existence, and that is what continues to happen. So for me, I think this is something that is really worth talking about. And we have seen many people, especially if you look at the happenings right now in West Africa, most of the activities going on in that part of the continent is because of the desire for Africa to really feel free and be free for real. There is a lot of problems that most Africans have gone through just because of the continued interference of Western nations. I like what I see with West African nations, especially those in the Sahel region, the countries that have decided to part ways with their former colonizers and have their African institutions supported to really develop our cultures and develop our talents in this part of the world. A good example is the president of Senegal. He was elected just the other day, and one thing that he did is he ensured that French is eliminated as the official national language. Another thing also is what Ibrahim Traore, captain, is doing in Burkina Faso. He has said that they will not have American bases in that part of the world, and they will also not be allowing French soldiers in their countries. They want their country to run on African ideals and those that were perpetuated and promoted by African founding fathers and Pan-Africanists. So going back to the video that we've just watched, I think we can say that the white guy is having a good message, but to the wrong group of people, because Africans have been persecuted for many years, and Africans have gone through a lot of challenges that we as a people have really had to ask ourselves a lot of questions, because look at what European nations are doing in Africa. Right now, there is an active conflict that is happening in DRC Congo, and there was an attempted coup that happened in that country some days ago. Many of those who participated in this coup are foreigners, and therefore we must really call a spade and call out Western nations for their interference in African continent. And based on this, I think they do not have any moral standing to dictate us on how we should live our lives and where we should visit or even go. So I don't know what you think about this, but for me, I believe the black guy has made a very, very good submission there, and I support him to some extent, but also looking at what the white guy was kind of portraying there, they must be ready to understand what Africa is and how Africa is formed. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel like this video and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.